Welcome to Forum 360. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Thank you for joining us for our global outlook with a local view. From the time we are young, we know about them, visit them, and many of us support them. We are fortunate in Northeast Ohio to have several of them, several zoos within a few 100-mile radius. Today we're going to take a look at zoos and zoo safety from a wider perspective, then a closer look at the role of zoos and a very close look at a few of the zoo residents like Lewis. To help us navigate our journey is the CEO of the Akron Zoo, Doug Piekarz, and the education manager, Patty Villers, who is going to be handling our friends today and telling us about them. So welcome, Lewis, welcome, Patty, and welcome, Doug.
Thanks.
In that order, you did notice. Lewis got
is the star.
First. Yes. He's the star. So let's start with Lewis. Patty, tell us a little bit about Lewis, what he is and what he does and what we should know about him.
Alrighty, well, Lewis is a type of lizard called a prehensile tail skink. And skinks are a very diverse family of lizards. We have little skinks here in Ohio.
Skinks. So
skinks.
When you call a person a skank, it's not necessarily a compliment, but if you call him a skank, that's what he is.
Skink.
With an I.
Yes.
Skink.
Yes.
Okay, a skink.
Yes.
A skink. Okay.
So this guy here is native to the Solomon Islands over on the other side of the world. And what's really neat about this type of lizard is that in the wild, they live up in the canopy, up in the trees. And so they use their tail almost like a fifth hand. So it is prehensile. They can use it to anchor themselves when they're climbing, or if they kind of lose their footing from a branch, they can catch with their tail and hopefully they're not falling down to the ground. He is not a lizard that has the detachable tail, like iguanas or the little anoles that will lose their tail if a predator gets it. He wants his tail to stay on. So this guy here, this is pretty much what he does during the day. He is a crepuscular lizard, so he's mainly active in the evening and then in the morning. And he's greatly camouflaged, but he really doesn't use his camouflage to sneak up on prey. He uses it to blend in to keep predators away from him. So he pretty much eats different types of plants, flowers, fruits, and then he will eat the occasional insect.
Now, was he born at your zoo or did he come from somewhere else?
He was not born at our zoo, but Lewis came from the St. Louis Zoo, so we get real creative on names, and that is where he was born. And he spent a couple years at their zoo, and then we went ahead and acquired him.
And how long will he live?
Reptiles, the better our research is on studying animals in the wild, most of your reptiles can live 20, 30, 40, 50 years or a little bit longer. So about 20, maybe 25 for him.
Now, will he get bigger as he gets older or will he stay the same size?
He is pretty much full grown. So he might get a little bit wider. So all of our animals, all of our
nice
animals.
to know we have something in common with a reptile.
Right, and they, our veterinarian, our chief veterinarian, looks at their diets on a monthly basis, a yearly basis, just to make sure they're getting the proper foods. And then weighing our animals is something that we do all the time, just to make sure that they're not getting too heavy or too thin.
Now, I feel a little bit like the old Johnny Carson when he used to get, visited by different animals, but can I touch him?
You certainly can. So you just want to touch him like right along the back. And some people say he feels like an ear of corn because those scales they're not slimy. A lot of people think reptiles are slimy, but they're not.
No.
They're nice and smooth.
Thank you, Lewis. Well, let me ask you, Doug, because as CEO, and I believe that culture always comes from the top, and so since you're CEO of the Akron Zoo, you started with a love of animals, fostered by your grandfather, as I understand it. Now, many people love animals. I love animals, but most of those people don't make a career with the zoo. So tell us briefly about your journey to get to the CEO of Akron Zoo?
Sure. For me, it really started as a kid because you mentioned my grandfather. My grandfather was a gigantic influence on my life. I grew up in Clifton, New Jersey, on the East Coast, literally being able to touch the house next to me. I was lucky enough to have a park in front of the house where I could go and interact with urban wildlife. My grandfather, however, had a small one-bedroom cabin in the mountains in the Catskills at the end of a dirt road. So literally, when I went up there, I was completely surrounded by nature. He took me on my first birding experience, on my first nature hike, touring a beaver dam, actually identifying all the trees in the woods, tracking animals. I learned to be a scatologist at a very early age. In other words, somebody who could look at the poo that's laying on the ground in a meadow and know what it came from. All of that, for me, really led to this internal drive and passion about wanting to save these spaces. And even the area around my grandfather's cabin was beginning to be developed. There was a lot of people moving in, a lot of houses being built, some utilitarian uses in that area, and I saw that landscape change over time. And there's no better lesson than personal experience so that you can actually translate that into an ability to do something. And for me, what I wanted to do was to make sure that I could provide that similar experience to as many people as possible as I was growing up. And it caused me to really have a love of biology, a love of nature that developed through high school and into college. My first position in the zoological field was at the Bronx Zoo, where I worked for 10 years before I came to Akron. And it just expanded day after day. Animal I encountered after animal I encountered, and this complete love for wildlife and wanting to be able to protect it, and the recognition that over time, as the human population has expanded, the wildlife populations have contracted, and we're at a point today where literally there is almost no true wild left on Earth. All lands are managed in some way by people. People have an impact. And what does that really mean to us? That means we need to have everybody begin to understand what that impact is, how they can individually help, and how places like the Akron Zoo can help bridge that gap.
Well, let's talk about, when you talk about impact, and we have, this is
Daisy.
Daisy, of course, Daisy.
Of course, right.
Of course.
She's a southern three-banded armadillo.
I have to tell you, I don't know if you can see this at home, but she is absolutely adorable. And our radio audience, if you cannot imagine how absolutely adorable an armadillo is, but Daisy is the cutest thing, the absolute cutest thing. So tell us, Doug, as we look at Daisy, or as we think about these different animals, why is a zoo important to a city and a community?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, zoos do have as part of their mission connecting their community to wildlife. Because as children especially grow up in very urban areas, and maybe they know, oh, that's a bird, but they don't know that's a song sparrow, or they know that's a mouse, but it's actually a chipmunk. Even those small little changes in urban wildlife and recognition of it is important, but children also need to be exposed to this greater vision of what nature really is, and exposed to the issues that nature currently is facing. And that direct connection that happens in a zoological park, where someone may come face to face with a species of wildlife that otherwise they will never see in their entire lives, and be able to look into the eyes of a lion, or look into the eyes of a tiger, or watch our snow leopard triplets just jumping all over each other and playing with mom and rolling over, and they see that they look just like their brothers and sisters when they go in the backyard and play. They look like a toddler playing in their yard. These connecting points really mean a lot, because it gives a level of appreciation first, connection second, and hopefully love. And then that love is what changes the decisions that that child one day will make as an adult that hopefully will benefit nature. Or even better, as we've actually seen, a lot of people who get the same stimulation in these zoological parks that I got from my grandfather and from the 2 zoos that were near my house when I grew up, that ended up transferring me into a career path to save the world. that's really what it was all about.
Well, speaking of saving the world, we're going to ask you about saving Akron in just a minute. But first, Patty, will you tell us a little bit about Daisy?
Sure.
Our little armadillo.
Our little armadillo. So, like I said, she is a southern three-banded armadillo. So you could find these animals in South America. This is different than the armadillo that we have here in the United States. Daisy is full grown, and what's really neat.
And how much does she weigh?
She probably weighs maybe a pound, if that.
Yeah, she's little.
So she's actually very light. And what's really neat about this species is that when she feels threatened, which you can tell she's not threatened whatsoever, I think she's fighting to stay awake, but she can curl up into a complete ball. So if you see her head plate, she'll roll into a ball, and then her head plate and her tail will make a complete protective circle.
Now, what does she looks like? She has fur, hair that looks like fur. What is that, and is it soft or is it bristly?
Well, if you'd like to touch her, we're going to touch her on the back, but
Okay.
the fur or
I'm
the
going to touch
hair
this. Okay.
isn't really soft. It's more, especially, I like to call it the long armpit hair, but the hair that's along the sides is very sensitive. So if you can see, she has very tiny eyes. So eyesight is not one of her strongest senses. It's really her sense of smell. And then these hairs are also sensitive to any movement. So if something is trying to sneak up on her, she can feel it coming, and then she'll snap closed.
Now, she looks like she would want her belly rubbed. Does she like her belly rubbed?
No. No. I've heard of other places trying to get them comfortable to touch. So if they need to do a vet exam, they could, take the stethoscope in there. But they are a very, I would say, reactive animal. So as soon as anything startles them, their instinct is to close very
up.
tightly.
Which makes it hard for a vet check, I would imagine.
It does. So one of the reasons why we have the proper nutrition and then weighing all the animals is that's usually the first indication that maybe the animal isn't feeling well. So then the vets can start looking at what is the animal feeling.
Well, it's really no different. If you call your vet about your dog, the first thing they're going to ask is he or she eating? So it's kind
And
of
is
the
he
same.
behaving normally?
Right.
That's really the important part here.
So you have to
because
know what
they-
normal is for every animal.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. And as Patty was saying, one of the things we do as part of our animal welfare program is we invite all the animals in the zoo to participate, to choose to participate in their own veterinary care. So as Patty was describing, being able to desensitize, in this case an armadillo, so that you could actually get a wand in there to be able to do a sonogram or something, we have similar things that go on. For example, I'll take the snow leopards because Shanti just had the triplets. In her case, she was actually trained to present for a sonogram and for an x-ray so that the vet could actually track progress of the pregnancy without having to provide an anesthetic and put her to sleep to do it. Because anytime that you have to do something like that, it's always riskier for the animal.
Sure.
And being able to ask her to perform this behavior so that we could track the condition of her cubs, it just saved stress across the board for the animal. And it's really a good state of welfare that results. And 3 healthy cubs.
Now, we were talking before we started, I've learned that deer having twins is fairly normal out in the wild, but is a snow leopard having triplets, is that normal or is that rare?
It is rarer. 2 is normal. Shanti in the past has had 2 litters of 2. This triplet now is somewhat unusual. Not unheard of, but somewhat unusual.
Today we are talking with different legged friends from the Akron Zoo. We have Daisy at the moment, the armadillo, and we have Patty Villers, education manager, and Doug Piekarz, the CEO of the Akron Zoo. So now here is my $1 million question. Why do we have and need an Akron Zoo? I said in the intro that we're very fortunate to be within a couple hundred miles of several different zoos. Why do we need or want an Akron Zoo?
Well, the one thing that I would say about zoos in general, zoos grow out of a need or a want within the community to have this kind of experience, to have this kind of cultural element within the community. Really, what do zoos do? And this includes the Akron Zoo. We are an informal science learning center. Our programs, from the education standpoint, which Patty represents, augment STEM education, programs like biomimicry, and meet all of the state science standards for each one of the programs that we put out. So ultimately, what are we able to deliver that other facilities that are not like us can't? We deliver that direct connection to wildlife, that direct connection to science education, and also the ability to engage the other elements of STEM, technology, engineering, and math. Because, for example, if you talk about how animals are treated within the zoological setting, and the things that are very important when you look at designing an animal habitat, you clearly engage science, both animal welfare, biology, organismal biology. You engage technology from the perspective of closed circuit television monitoring to all sorts of data collection, all through technological means. The engineering, you need to know how those animals perform and what their jump distances are, what their weight is, their acceleration in the exhibit, things like that, so that you can ensure that you've got appropriate safe boundaries. And then the math, I mean, that's very clear. It comes through all of that because geometry, algebra, all of these pieces are actively used on that job. And when you look at a species like you just saw in Daisy, Daisy represents a species survival plan representative. Species survival plans are actually put together by AZA accredited zoos for individual species that require more in-depth management for their future protection. So these programs look at maintaining 90% of the current genetic diversity within that population for a century. So we're looking well beyond, and that level of genetic management's important.
If I was a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, how would my experience coming to the Akron Zoo be different than going to another zoo?
Well, Akron Zoo does pride itself as being responsive specifically to our community. And we have spent the last 20 years deciding what the zoo needs to be, but it wasn't the zoo staff who decided. It was the community in Summit County who decided what the zoo would be. The zoo is an up-close and personal, inspirational animal experience, allowing children and adults alike to get up close and personal with those animals.
So for someone from this area that's only been to the Akron Zoo and hasn't been to other zoos, not all zoos are like that. That was a decision of the Akron Zoo, but that doesn't mean all zoos are like that.
No, it doesn't mean all zoos are like that, and it doesn't mean all communities would want that kind of experience. For us, the safety of the animals, the safety of the public, the welfare of the animals, the welfare of the guest, and the overall science education message that goes around it are all critical components.
We're going to come back to safety in just a moment after we meet our most recent guest.
Well, this is Buzz. And Buzz is a really cool bird from Australia. He's called a tawny frogmouth, and most people have never heard of a tawny frogmouth, have never seen a tawny frogmouth. So when we take him out for meet and greets or for programs, people right away think he's some sort of owl because he has the big eyes and kind of the bark colored camouflage. But he is not related to owls or hawks. He is actually related to other birds like nightjars and whippoorwills. But Buzz here is probably not going to take his eyes off of me. He's just checking me out. But what's really neat about the tawny frogmouth is they are excellent camouflagers. They're probably one of the best animals to play hide and seek with. They will always win. You will always be searching for them. They will sit completely motionless in a tree, so that way if a predator comes by, they're probably not going to see them, or when they're hunting at night, their prey won't see them. And another thing that they'll do, and how he got the name Buzz, is when he is agitated, or if they're agitated in the wild, they will actually make a buzzing sound or a bee sound. So most people and most animals know if you hear buzzing, you want to go away from it. You don't want to get close to it.
Now, you don't have to have any kind of a protective glove to hold him?
Not for Buzz. The way that he hunts is he will pretty much stay motionless on a branch, or in Australia, you might have one sitting on your porch fence, and then they jump down and they will gobble up their prey with their mouth. So they don't have a lot of power in their feet, and their claws aren't sharp like an owl's.
Thank you. Well, I cannot believe how fast this has gone by because of Lewis and Daisy and Buzz. But in the remaining minutes, I'm going to ask you for, I know, short answers to, I know, questions that do not have just short answers, and I know that and apologize for that ahead of time. What is one thing that people coming to a zoo can do to help themselves be safer and help the zoo keep them safer?
Well, safety really starts with the guest, so behaving the same way they would in a large crowded shopping mall or at a fair in a park, that applies here too. So making sure that you know where your group members are and that you follow any of the posted rules, those are the kinds of things that can keep you safe.
You know, I was reading about zoo safety, and I was surprised that I read that one of the things that people do when they go to a zoo is that they taunt the animals. And that surprised me so much that people, you think, go to a zoo because they love the animals. I don't think of them taunting. But, you know, again, what are some things directly that is like good zoo etiquette?
Generally speaking, when you come into the zoo, if you have younger children, have a conversation with them about the animals and about their interaction with them, and that you're here to really observe them. You're here to understand both the behaviors, the animal, get nose to nose, but taunting is where it crosses the line. And one of the things I would say is, if you as a zoo visitor see something like that, then say something. One of the things that Akron prides itself on is our guest experience. Our staff are trained in guest experience, our volunteers are trained, and there's almost always someone in a uniform fairly close by for you to go and notify them if you see a problem somewhere in the zoo, and we will be on it immediately.
So who teaches, is it just up to each family? Who teaches kids how to visit a zoo?
Generally speaking, it's going to be the family members, because all education starts at home. But it's also, for example, if we get a large school group coming in, we actually have our staff board the bus, go over the rules of attending that day. We also talk in advance with all of the chaperones. They get the rules for visiting the zoo in a large group in advance. When they come on grounds, if they're part of one of our organized programs, Patty will interact with them directly, or any one of our other educators. But for a general visitor, they're going to receive a zoo map along with the zoo rules when they come to our admissions counter. They have an opportunity then to ask any question from those who are at the admissions counter and from our ticket takers. So every person who comes into the zoo has 2 direct staff contacts before they walk into the zoo. Many zoos follow that very same process, but ultimately, this becomes one of those issues where guest behavior sometimes actually drives zoo design, and we are forever looking over all incidents that happened at Akron and that happen at every other zoo, because according to our accreditation requirements, we have to have not only emergency procedures in place should any kind of accident happen, whether it be intentional or unintentional, but we also have safety requirements in place for every exhibit we build, every animal building we build, every human-based building we build, all of which have to be consistently reviewed every year when our facility or another facility may have an accident. It's really no different than any other location. Cedar Point, I'm sure, does the exact same thing.
I'm going to ask you in 1 or 2 words, are some species more charismatic than others?
Since you're talking about human perception, I would guarantee you the answer out of a focus group would be yes.
And can you tell me some of the animals that top the list? In a few seconds, can you tell me some of the animals that top the list of zoo favorites?
Akron Zoo favorites or general?
You go.
All right. At the Akron Zoo, we know our lions, our tigers, our grizzly bears, our Komodo dragons, and surprisingly, equal to them, our Humboldt penguin colony, because we are the only permanent Humboldt penguin colony, only penguin colony in Northeast Ohio. They're incredibly popular. And then as you look around, any of the large cats are generally very popular and make direct connections. The more direct guest engagement based on the curiosity of the individual animal or the likeness of the individual animal to some kind of human behavior, that is what really hits on the charisma. That's what most people see as charismatic. And that's why a hissing cockroach is often not as charismatic.
A hissing cockroach. You heard it here. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360. In yet another way today, we brought you a local view of zoos and their role in our society today. We learned from Doug Piekarz, the CEO. We learned from Patty Villers, the education manager. And we learned from Lewis and Daisy and Buzz. We also learned why zoos are an important part of our communities. We even learned why some people, choose the zoo for to support and to visit often. Now you know that it's not just zoos, it's plants and the space, because if you have animals, they have to have a place to be. We also hope that you can feel more comfortable in how safe your next zoo visit may be. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Akronist.com, Hudson Cable, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.